On this exciting episode, grab a goatee and your 1940 Packard and get your facial hair adorned face in that chariot you're driving to Pinion City. Pronto, it's Founders Day. It's also Perry Mason, Season 4, Episode 20, The Case of the Barefaced Witness. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel if the episode was an adaptation. We give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, and then revel in a Perry proverb. That's a pro of wisdom from the man himself before we head to the water cooler where, just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our fave legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the law library! Each time we visit the law library, we discuss a legal conundrum from Perry's case that helps us set future courtroom precedents. In this trip, we cover common law marriage. Tell us all about it through your sobs, Josephine Hutchinson.
Just before the baby was born, my husband left me. He ran away.
Your husband?
I think it's called common law husband.
Now we're going to turn the mic over to the pod's unofficial legal counsel, Tom Wiltshire, who has this to say about common law marriage. Quote, the three elements required for common law marriage of emancipated adults, minors are disabled from consenting to marriage, are 1. The couple must have the mental intent to be and to live as married. 2. They must hold themselves out to all third parties as married. And 3. They must cohabit for anywhere from 1 night to 7 years, depending on jurisdiction. California Civil Code 1872 fixed 15 years of age as the age at which a female could marry without parental consent. Common law marriage was abolished in California in 1895. End quote. Thanks so much, Tom. And with that in mind, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Barefaced Witness. Dan Southern is beard free and on the prowl. Oh, and he's also played by Bruce Wayne, aka Adam West, aka the Batman. And he's got something to say to former jailbird Fred Swan. Say your piece, brother Bruce.
I serve my time. Is it necessary to persecute me? Persecute you? Legally, you may be clean, but morally, you're still a thief. What about Iris McKay? She was never accused in a court of law. But thanks to you, Pinion City has been about as rough on her as it was on you. Oh, yes. Dan Southern. You're the old boyfriend, aren't you? Well, your concern for Iris is coming a little late, isn't it?
Speaking of Iris McKay, she's entering Paul Drake's office back in L.A., and she's giving us more exposition.
The gossip said that Swan gave you the money, and that you either kept it or hid it for him.
That's why I left town. Everybody kept watching me, following me. I really only dated Fred Swan a few times, but unfortunately, it was just at the wrong time.
I'm sorry. I sure wasn't much help clearing your name, was I? But even the FBI hasn't been able to find that money.
Drake offers his help, and Iris is gonna need it if her Aunt Sarah's involved.
You needn't have come to meet me.
I never avoid the unpleasant, Iris. You're much too pale. Have you been ill?
No, I've been fine.
Come along. The car is out at the side.
Ah, Aunt Sarah, clad in black, Josephine Hutchinson is rocking the worried look she's trotted out so well in The Case of the Screaming Woman and The Spanish Cross. Plus, there's that 1940 Packard, the machine. Bruce Wayne's hanging around and asking Iris passive-aggressively about why she's come back to town. Iris leaves old Danny S. with the impression she's got eyes for Fred Swan.
Is that why you came back? Because of Fred Swan?
Maybe.
Yeah, it figures. Okay, you might try the Plantation Motel, cabin 6.
Iris gets the Packard from Aunt Sarah, goes to the hotel Dan said he saw Swan at, but instead of finding Fred, she finds Marta Wiltern, and the subject of real estate comes up.
I used to work for a real estate man, W.O. Pickard. He handled the sale for that farm.
How things have changed. When I knew that farm, it was nothing but a lot of dried up, worthless land, like most of the valley.
Later, it turns out Marta's hooking up with Fred Swan, and cash is involved. Delightful, those crazy kids.
Well, I'm glad you're not interested in money.
Why do you suppose that I visited you so often in prison?
My handsome face. Okay, you're mercenary. Now let's have a drink, huh?
Iris goes for some grub at the local Meat and Three, and it turns out local restaurateur Alfred Needham was the one who sent her the anonymous note to get her back to town. Why? He thinks he saw Fred Swan slip Aunt Sarah a package.
And he was going to leave it here before we went dancing.
He didn't check it with me. I know because I saw him give it to somebody else outside.
Who?
Iris. That's one of the reasons I sent you that note. You won't take offense. It's the gospel truth. Your Aunt Sarah.
As soon as you see Malcolm Atterbury's face anywhere near a Perry Mason case, you automatically think he's got murdering on his mind. Next, we meet the estimable General P.T. Beauregard. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just W.L. Don't Call Me Jean-Luc Picard, the local real estate man who's dressed up like he's a Confederate gentleman. He's Iris's former boss, and he's apparently doing some wheelin' dealin' for Aunt Sarah.
I've paid off my back taxes. You don't know what a relief that is. With all these outsiders crowding into town because of the new Valley Dam and every one of them looking for a place to live, the house could have been sold out from under me.
Now, you be sure and keep these papers in a nice, safe place.
Here, Iris, maybe you'd better take them.
Iris gets Perry to check out her apartment to locate a mysterious folder. Perry and Paul meet up at the apartment, find it ransacked, and have this to say to one another.
She said you were cutting in on my racket.
Well, you can have it all back.
Might not be a bad idea at that. You lack the light touch necessary in this business, but thanks for trying.
Delightful, love those two. That means Paul's going to Pinion City. He gets picked up right off the train because he's got no beard on, you see, and we get this whole routine about Founders Day, beards, and the whole 9 yards.
This week, everybody gets dressed up. A beard or $5. That's the law.
Well, not having any fast hair...
Don't try to bribe us, mister. First the paddy wagon, then you get mugged, then you pay. Excuse us, miss. Really, friend, no offense. The dough goes for charity.
Just to comment on the $5 fine, you could get 5 ground sirloin steak dinners over at Needham's joint with that kind of cash. After asking around town, Paul goes out to the farm and finds a body. And Dan.
Who are you and what's going on here?
Why are you looking for Iris? She's got nothing to do with this.
Nothing to do with what?
His name's Fred Swan.
It's Iris who ends up in jail, and when Paul comes to call, he's got one man's name on his mind.
What do we do now?
If you have no objections, I'll call Los Angeles.
Los Angeles?
An attorney, Perry Mason.
In court, we see prosecutor Jonathan Hale. He regrets that he has but one bow tie to wear for his court appearance. And he calls, you can call me Al Needham, Aunt Sarah, Marta, my dear Wiltern, and Dan Southern to the stand to make his case against Iris McKay.
We've established the corpus delicti, as they say in the big cities.
In a court recess, the Perry crew discovers that it just might be a barefaced witness that helps them solve the case.
What's this?
It's a list of all those arrested and fined for not wearing beards.
What about them?
I have a hunch one of them is our thief.
9 names here. Our thief? You mean the one that busted into Iris's apartment? How do you figure that?
I admit it's a long shot. But unless the thief came up here prepared, he arrived in town barefaced.
Oh. In which case, he would be arrested and mugged. Hey, they even took my picture.
Better get going.
See you later.
Back in court, Perry starts recalling witnesses right and left and uncovers a money trail that leads back to Beauregard Picard.
But you and Swan still remain partners, and it was you who supplied the middleman. In this case, Letitia Cochran.
Yes, I did it through her.
And so that $33,750 never at any time had one thing to do with Iris McKay.
No, it didn't.
Would you just tell this court where we can find Letitia Cochran?
I told you, I haven't seen her in over 3 years.
That's enough, Mr. Picard. I certainly wouldn't want you to perjure yourself.
Now comes the revelation from Aunt Sarah.
What knowledge did Mr. Picard have of you that enabled him to coerce you to such an extent? What else was in that folder, Miss McKay?
A birth certificate for Mary Frances Cochran, my daughter.
Now the payoff. Your murderer is...
All right, I was after that folder. But all I wanted was the reward. I mean, at first I didn't know anything about land deals. Only in that folder when I discovered about Letitia Cochran. When I went out and tried to make a deal with Swan. When I tried to cut in on him and Picard. He went crazy. He'd been drinking. He was like a crazy man. He lunged at me with a board. I knocked him down. I had to. It was self-defense.
Al Needham, I knew it! In our denouement, Paul and Dan play explainers. And then Iris and Dan go cruising in the Packard. It's Sarah who gets the episode's last line.
Just how old is that machine?
22 years. But I think it's time to trade it in for a new model. Don't you?
All bets are off. It's the little old lady from Pinion City. Her 4-speed stick and a 426 now. Go, Sarah, go. What car will she buy next? Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul concerns the sweet Buick ride Paul rents for his Pinion City detecting. It's a 1961 Buick Electra. Traditionally, Paul's cruising in a Ford Thunderbird. So my question is this: did Paul get a rental upgrade or a downgrade? Pauls, let me know what you find. Our Della for this episode is Paul Fix. He of the rural prosecutorial panache, that bow tie. You know him better as Jonathan Hale.
Oh, Your Honor, this is highly irregular. If the counselor wishes to put on a case for the defense...
It was Mr. Hale who wished to keep this hearing simple, I believe.
Here's 10 about Paul. Born Peter Paul Fix, March 13th, 1901, Dobbs Ferry, New York. Father, a brewer from Germany. Number 2, April 1917, joins the National Guard. After 3 months duty, goes AWOL. Then joins the Army for 3 months. Then goes AWOL. Then enlists in the Navy and stationed in Providence, Rhode Island. While serving in the Navy, he's recruited to perform on stage in a production of the HMS Pinafore, a famous comic opera. He serves until he's officially discharged in 1919. Number 3, by the 1920s, moves to Hollywood. In the 1930s, introduced by director John Ford to a young actor named John Wayne. He becomes John Wayne's unofficial acting coach, drama coach for the rest of Wayne's career. Fix eventually appears as a featured player in over 20 John Wayne films. Number 4, let's name some other big Paul Fix appearances on the big screen. Richard Bravo in The Bad Seed. He's Elizabeth Taylor's dad in Giant. He's the presiding judge in To Kill a Mockingbird. He's a sheriff in The Sons of Katie Elder. And he's a New Mexico rancher in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Number 5, you probably know him best on the small screen as Marshal Micah Torrance on The Rifleman. He also played Dr. Mark Piper in the second pilot episode of Star Trek. That's the character that eventually got replaced by Leonard McCoy, played by DeForest Kelley. Number 6, other shows this dude was on: Rawhide, Wagon Train, Twilight Zone, The FBI, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Time Tunnel, Wild Wild West, Gunsmoke, Daniel Boone, Owen Marshall, Rockford Files, Streets of San Francisco, $6 Million Man, and even Battlestar Galactica. In fact, he had almost 350 movie and television appearances by the end of his career. Number 7, in 1922, Fix married Frances Harvey. The couple had one daughter. They divorced in 1945. Number 8, that one daughter, her name, Marilyn. She marries another John Ford actor, one Harry Carey Jr. in 1944. They have 4 children together. Number 9, Paul Fix marries his second wife, Beverly Pratt, in 1949. They stay married until her death in 1979. Number 10, Paul Fix dies of kidney failure in LA at the age of 82. In 1983, he is buried beside his second wife in Santa Monica. Our Perry for this episode concerns our man knowing just what makes his detective friend Paul happy.
You know, there's a celebration going on up there.
A celebration, a mystery, a girl in distress. Paul, I think you're going to enjoy Pinion City.
I just love a guy who knows his friends. And Paul does have a good time, I'd say. BT Dubs, Iris, pick Paul over Dan Southern. That guy's a wet blanket, just saying. Our theme for this episode is coming clean. Sure, there's the literal coming clean, the shave that men get busted for, but coming clean is a good thing. It's a small town, Pinion City, where everybody gossips, so you'd think there are no secrets to hide. Dan Southern, the local journalist, that dude's basically printing sewing circle hearsay as newspaper articles. But everybody wants a cover-up on their face, on their past, especially on their bank books. Aunt Sarah with her common law marriage. Goodness, Beauregard Picard and his real estate wheeling dealing. And for what? And then there's Al Needham going snooping where he's not wanted. And the guy's completely clueless about the whole thing. He's playing for peanuts. Picard's playing for the whole ball of wax. Best to come clean. Illustrated best by Dan Southern, who never wears a beard. Paul, thank goodness, never puts on a beard. And Iris even lets her hair down. And look at Sarah getting a new machine as the episode ends and saying what everybody knows. It's time to move on. And thank goodness we didn't have to see Perry in a paste-on goatee, huh? Now, let's get to a Perry proverb. Perry wants you to come clean. Sometimes he has to do it with rhetorical force. Al Needham obviously killed Fred Swan. The only question is, did he do it in self-defense? Perry's proverbial response puts the kibosh on Al's initial bit of disingenuity.
Was it self-defense when you then crushed his skull with a jack handle?
Proverb, meet your application. It's never self-defense when you crush a man's skull with a jack handle, Al. You're going away for a long time, buddy. That ground sirloin steak dinner probably won't be 95 cents anymore by the time you get out of the slammer. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
You know, there is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each episode in the water cooler, I give you deleted scenes, outtakes from the script that didn't quite make the episode's final cut. Tom Wiltshire was kind enough to contribute to our Law Library segment this episode. He threw in a couple of deleted scenes for good measure. Number 1, the bat signal flashes in the sky while Adam West is on the stand. He sees it through the Palladian window, runs out of the courtroom yelling, "Join me for the exciting conclusion of my testimony tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel." And number 2, in the lunchroom episode, oh, you know it's coming, right? Paul comes into the diner, nudges Adam West off his stool to dig into some bacon and eggs, grabs Della's orange juice and gulps it down, and then grabs half a ham sandwich from a bearded stranger's plate before he leaves. Good times all around. Thanks, Tom. In our last Paul prompt, we asked about the jewel dust that led the cops to the robber in the case of the blind man's bluff.
Well, I don't see any marks on the floor.
Well, they wouldn't be visible to the naked eye. But this mineral dust may fluoresce, glow under black ray.
My dad wrote in with this response: jewel dust is a real thing. All minerals have the ability to reflect light, which is what makes them visible to the human eye. Some minerals have a property known as fluorescence. These minerals have the ability to temporarily absorb a small amount of light and an instant later release a small amount of light of a different wavelength. This change in wavelength causes a temporary color change of the mineral in the eye of the human observer. The wavelength of light released from a fluorescent mineral is often different from the wavelength of the incident light. This produces a visible change in the color of the mineral, and this glow continues as long as the mineral is illuminated with the light of the proper wavelength. Well, there you go. We've got some actual forensic work going down on Perry. Love it. Thanks, Dad. Now it's time to get to some listener letters. Speaking of Paul prompts, my dad sent in a great answer to the Paul prompt from the case of the angry dead man. I wanted to share it here. He writes, quote, Will Nesbitt may have suffered from a malignant cardiac tumor. If it was a primary heart tumor, meaning the tumor started in the heart, it could have been angiosarcoma or mesothelioma, the latter made famous by plaintiff counsel ads. Alternatively, it may have been a metastatic heart tumor, meaning it started as cancer elsewhere that spread to the heart. Depending on the virulence of the cancer and the growth of the tumor, such a condition could cause a heart attack and sudden death, as well as a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. Pent-up anger makes a heart attack more likely and can accelerate cancer growth and hasten death. I would argue that Mr. Nesbitt's ire made him an angry dead man walking, so to speak. Close quote. Great stuff, Dad. Love it. Longtime listener Tim Cree, not to be confused with Tom Wiltshire, added this note about actor John Conte. Quote, I noticed after Blind Man's Bluff that in time John Conte will complete the Perry trifecta. Oh yes, the defendant, victim, and killer roles. End quote. We'll keep our eyes peeled for that completion, Tim, as well as other actors and actresses who fill all three main guest spots. Our next listener comes from Trivia Maven Nancy. She writes, many thanks to Aunt Mai for her comments. I had to laugh because she referenced Tom and Nancy, Tom Wiltshire, Nancy, the Trivia Maven. My husband's name is Tom. Nancy notes, speaking of which, my husband is also an attorney, which, of course, Trivia Maven Nancy's husband is an attorney. Nancy writes, I asked him the question you asked about whether Perry would have a file on a jewelry contract. This is what he sent me. Perry likely had in his law library a multi-volume treatise with annotated draft legal forms, such as Nichols' Cyclopedia of Legal Forms or Warren's Forms of Agreement, which contained a wide array of draft forms that could be customized to fit the particular representation. For example, attached is the first page of a form of consignment agreement between an artist and a gallery, which could serve as the basis for an agreement between a jewelry owner and store. These treatises have been around for decades. I saw that Amazon is selling an edition of Nichols' Cyclopedia from 1936. Thanks so much. Finally, Tom, this is Tom Wiltshire, points out that the beardless men were fined $5, but that on the list Dan hands Paul, there's only 9 offenders. So it appears that the charity raised a measly $45. Great point, Tom. For all you YouTube fans, Listener MB. Listener MB has been posting some massive comments on back episodes. Go and check those out. Some YouTubers are continually disgruntled when they find that the episode is not the actual episode, but an episode of this podcast. I guess it's kind of a running bit. And occasionally episodes that I post get pulled from YouTube. I'm not sure what triggers the algorithm. There are other podcast options. I love it when you write in. So if you have a comment about an episode or the pod in general, send it on to theperrypod@gmail.com. Next time, you're a construction man who's been set up. The man who did the upsetting is dead, and you've got to find your attorney at a social gathering. Who you going to call? Perry Mason for the case of the difficult detour. Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!